What's going on, everybody? If you read my post, you know that I filmed this case study and somehow on my microphone, when I was setting everything up, I pushed this button and it muted everything. Literally everything. Like, none of my clips have any audio at all. Everything's muted. So I have right at 49 minutes worth of video and that I done with no audio. So bear with me. I'm gonna try my best to kind of just give a voiceover for everything. Um, Probably just talk about some stuff with give you some screenshots of stuff and get this case out there because it is very interesting. Um, and we'll see how this goes. Okay, so a little bit of backstory with this truck that I have before I even start filming it. Um, when I originally got there, I did a pre-scan and it had a few codes in it, a P061B, of course a P1000, a P2105, P2106, and a U0300. Um, those are the codes that was in the computer, the engine computer, when I first scanned it. Um, and pretty much my approach was I wanted to just clear them, um, watch some live data, and see what sets first. And whenever I did that, this was on a cold start. It was actually a crank stall, and if I kept messing with it, it would crank and run. But even on the first crank stall, the first codes that it was set is the Corsa P1000, which on Forge just means it's not random monitors, which everybody should know that by now. Um, a P2105 tack system forced engine shutdown. So that's my stall. My crank stall is P2105. And then this U0300 internal control module software incompatibility. Okay, with those codes being set, basically right as soon as I'm cranking it, getting it to run, it kind of put me down a rabbit hole with service information. And if you look up the two codes on ALLDATA, they both kind of take you to the same area. This pinpoint testing labeled QE, which is all just kind of throttle body related troubleshooting. And I kind of wanted to follow the flow chart a little bit and kind of read through both codes and see if either one of them would get me to an answer. But first, let's look at the descriptions of these things. So with the U0300, this DTC indicates there are incompatible software levels within the powertrain control module that control the electronic throttle control system. The electronic throttle control system utilizes three different microprocessors within the PCM, each having its own software level and function. So there's three microprocessors, and each microprocessor is kind of responsible for doing calculations for different things with the throttle. It's basically kind of what it's saying. And the software in the three microprocessors are not correct for each other. Like one's making calculations that don't agree with calculations from another one. So, uh, following this trouble, like, or this diagnostic flow chart, it led me to actually just update the PCM. First off, let's just update the PCM, make sure somebody's not been messing with this thing tuning wise or whatever. Make sure we just not got a corrupted file somehow in the computer due to low voltage charging or jumping it off, something crazy. So first off, I wanted to update the computer. Shop okayed it. Yes, update the computer. So we did that. Same exact issue. Same two codes. As soon as I got done programming it, updating it, same thing. U0300 and P2105. So I was like, okay, well, let's look more into this 2105 code. The P2105 throttle actuator or TAC system forced the engine shutdown. The TAC system is in the failure mode effects management. So they call this FMEM mode of forced engine shutdown. This DTC is informational DTC and may set in combination with a number of other DTCs which are causing the FMEM, failure mode effects management. Diagnose other DTCs first. Okay, so I've only got the two codes that immediately reset, the U0300 and this code. So by this code description, I need to follow the trouble tree for the U0300. Okay, so on to the trouble tree. This QE pinpoint testing. And basically the first thing it wants you to do are any DTCs present other than the following. So basically if you've got any of these DTCs, you're going to continue on with this path. If you've got any other DTCs, it wants you to stop worrying about these, troubleshoot them first. I don't. I have the U0300 and the P2105 code. So my answer is no. I do not have any other DTCs other than this. When you go down to the no section, it kind of breaks it down per code and gives you different parts of this pinpoint test that you should go to. And for my U0300, because that's the only other code that I'm having set, and 2105 tells me to diagnose that first, it says we should go to pinpoint test QE2. And then on QE2, it's basically already telling me to do what I've already done, program the PCM to the latest calibration, and retest is basically anything resetting. So are DTCs present? Yes. Go to QE18. So right here it's saying update the engine computer. If this problem is still present, go to QE18. Disconnect all PCM connectors, inspect for pushed out pins, corrosion, basically all that kind of stuff. And is the concern still present? I did that. I took all my connectors loose, looking for water intrusion or anything like that. Everything looked fine. I even load tested my powers and grounds and everything at this point, and everything was there. Good powers, good grounds, good data line to it. Everything was there. So, is my concern still present? Yes, it is. So, here was my first call. It's a bad PCM. To me, there's something wrong with one of the microprocessors in this thing, in this PCM, that's just bad. It's just faulty. It's not a software issue, it's a bad microprocessor. So, it is install new PCM. We got one, I put it in, and these codes still set immediately. Truck was still kind of a crank stall. Kept messing with it, and it finally kind of got to a point where it would run a little bit, but after a little bit, it would still stall out. So now I'm going back, kind of thinking, like, what's going on with this thing? What am I missing? And at this point, I also kind of noticed that every time I cycled the ignition key, uh, my gauge cluster would flutter a little bit, like it's resetting the needles. And if you're in the Facebook group, you've seen the picture of the fuse that I'd found that feeds power to the cluster. And this sent me kind of down another rabbit hole, kind of. The strange thing is that when I replaced this fuse, I went through, cleared all the codes, and I cranked and ran the truck. And the truck ran perfectly fine. My throttle worked good. Everything worked great. But it was getting late in the afternoon. It was almost 6 o'clock about this time. The shop had already shut down. They'd left, and um, basically just told me, lock the gate on the way out. So I didn't want to drive the truck yet because they were closed. Um, so my game plan was, okay, truck's fixed. I'm just going to come back tomorrow, drive this thing, verify everything's fine with it. And when I got there the next day, it was not fine. It was back to being broke. So now I'm thinking, okay, if this thing gets hot, it stops acting up. So I messed with it, got it started, got it running, got it to the point where I could mess with the throttle, engine and rev, everything sitting there seemed fine. So I'm like, great, let's go drive this thing, see what happens with it. So we went and drove, or I went and drove it, and just easy driving. The truck was perfectly fine. So I'm thinking, what is going on with this thing? So on the way back to the shop, I kind of just beat on it a little bit, give it some full throttle pulls up some hills and stuff, and it didn't take very long, and it basically come up with I think it was a service. What what light? Come on, I can't remember. I think it maybe just the wrench light. Oh no, it was the tow haul button light. The tow haul light come on, and then the wrench light come on, and I'm getting pretty close to the shop at this point. So I'm like losing. I feel like I'm losing my throttle response. So pulling the turn lane, and of course, yep, I've definitely lost some throttle response. Like it'll rev, but kind of not. So I get it across the road, back into the shop's driveway, and as I'm driving back into the lot, it actually dies on me. And I'm thinking, what in the world is going on with this thing? And this time, while I drove it, it actually set a lot more codes. And they are transmission codes and a mass airflow sensor code, as well as my TAC codes. So I'm looking at these codes like, okay, turbine speed shaft, intermediate shaft, and output speed shaft, as well as a map sensor. I'm like, what in the world is going on with this? And so I went and talked to the shop, and he's like, yeah, when it first come in, it had all kinds of transmission codes in it. Okay, so now we've got all these other codes, and the first one I kind of want to look at is this mass airflow sensor code. And it is circuit low input. So I'm thinking, well, this should be something pretty easy to verify. So I back probed it and scoped it, and it has a lot of noise in it, as you can see here, but I'm never really losing anything. And this was while I was acting up as well. But my live data shows that my mass airflow's voltage basically flatlines. So I'm looking at this live data going, okay, well, I see my mass airflow sensor reading correctly, and then all of a sudden it flatlines, but yet my voltage coming out is still working, it is still functioning. So what you're seeing here in the screen capture is the data shows my voltage is stopped, is flatlined at this mass airflow reading, and my actual mass airflow sensor voltage does change with throttle. That's why it goes up and kind of dips back down, flat lines, and kind of raises up a little bit more. So my sensor is still working. The computer is not. So I'm thinking, like, what in the world is going on with this thing? So I wanted to check another thing. I've got codes basically for all three speed sensors on the transmission. Okay, so there's no signal and circuit fault. Well, for it to be no signal, the PCM would have to see no signal, correct? You'd think. So what would cause that? Well, the power feeding it could go away. The ground feeding it could go away. Either one of those would cause signal to go away, or I could just lose signal altogether. So my next move was to drive this thing scoping my power, my signal, and my ground, which is all supplied by the PCM, to the turbine speed shaft or turbine speed sensor. So at the computer, I connected all three of these wires. I used Pierce probes on them, drove this thing, and the scope doesn't lie. The PCM was still supplying the 12 volts, it was still supplying the ground, and I still had a perfect signal at the PCM for this turbine speed shaft. It's like, so this again is looking like bad computer. So I'm thinking, how could I have two bad computers? I'm thinking, what could cause this? What could be doing this? And at this point, I've been messing with this truck for a few days. I've got hours in this thing, and I kind of got lucky because from this point of scoping these wires and seeing that my PCM is perfectly fine to the next day, I go and diagnose the Dodge Ram with the cam sensor fault. If you've not seen that video, here's the little banner or whatever they call it for that, the link to that video. Go watch that, because that that truck helped me solve this truck. So if you've seen the video, you know where we're going with this. So I'm thinking, okay, what could be causing this? And I wanted to figure out what could be causing this PCM to lose a processor. We already know there's three processors in there, and one of them's responsible for TAC. Well, what if another processor is responsible for transmission or mass airflow sensor? What could be knocking these processors offline or causing them to basically lock up, freeze? So this is a point where I actually come back the next morning when it was cold and started filming. and that's where all this kind of went haywire, and I don't have audio for hardly anything. So I know this is kind of a long kind of backstory to this truck. I just wanted to catch you up to where I was at when I started filming. And when I started filming, I did cover all this. I went back over all this, but whatever. So from here on out, I'm going to try to lace in some video clips and some audio from when I was doing my Picoscope captures, because my laptop did pick up audio because it's got a microphone. It's just not great quality, but it'll help. So let's get into my Picoscope captures of this PCM and what's going on with it. Okay, so in this clip right here, I'm basically just kind of going over my wiring connections. I got channel 1 on one of the ignition feeding the PCM. Channel 2 is also on an ignition feeding the PCM. There's a one keep alive memory and then 2 ignition switch powers. And those are the 2 main ones that supply power to everything on this ECM, really, or PCM. The keep alive doesn't really do much other than keep memory. So I've also got channel 3 on the number 1 ignition coil command wire to give a sync, and I cleaned off the bolt on the battery there to make sure I have a good clean connection to the battery. And of course I'm using a 20-to-1 attenuator on the coil wire because you don't want to spike your scope, of course. And that's basically what I've got set up. Channel 1 and 2 is on the switched ignition feeds to the PCM, and channel 3 is ignition 1 coil sync. So here I'm just kind of showing on the scope everything set up. Okay, so as you can see on the scope, our battery voltage, or our ignition voltage to the PCM right now is 11.7. Okay, and the attenuator voltage here is 650 millivolts. So if you take this number and times that by 20, you're going to come pretty close to that number. You're going to be a little off. Just because it's a 20-to-1 doesn't mean it's perfect 20, but it's going to be real close. Okay, so 20-to-1. We got a 20-to-1 reduction in input voltage. Let's crank this thing up. And I'm actually going to give myself some more time on the screen, just because I like seeing more time. And we'll wait till this page goes by, and I'm going to crank this thing and see what happens. And we're using number 1 as a sync. Okay. So crank stall. I don't know why that voltage changed right there. Oh, well, I know why. It's because it spiked. Yeah, okay. So it auto scaled on me and changed to 50 volts because it was seeing more than 20 volts. So it auto scaled because I'm using the BNC Plus connector. So let's dig into this waveform and see what we find. Alright, so the green traces are number 1 sync. So as you can see down here, we stalled kind of, but we can still see that all the coils are firing. And you see this one here? That's a little suspect, because go away. Because you can kind of see all these other ones. You can see the noise from the other ones, and then this one has some drastically more noise. So and then this was our number one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, back to 1. So you can see all 8 coils producing a little bit of noise, but the one right there is a little more suspect, and you see it here and then here as well. What does that do with their voltage trace? Well, it's pretty substantial. Let's get just this section here. Look at this. You can see how that picks up very well in this power feed. On both of them, kind of. You can actually see number one has a pretty good bit of noise as well. And then you can see the noise from the others also, but this one is really bad. So if we take a voltage ruler and put on there, get out of the way, we're getting spikes on our ignition power feeding the PCM at 17 volts there. Okay, so these modules really only are made to sustain, voltage up to about 16 volts or so. Anything over that kind of freaks them out. That's very drastic. So let's look at our firing order here. 137265. So that's probably, is that number 5? Yeah. Let's see. There would be 1. Let's go 4. Number 4. Yeah, I think this is number 4. Let's see. So this is number 1. And what's our firing order? 372. So it'll be 3, 7, and 2. 6548. 6548. So yeah, this is number 4. So I'm going to pull out the number 4 coil, see what's going on right there, and probably going to go ahead and just so y'all can see, we're going to fix this with putting a coil in this thing. I don't know that I want to take the plug out, because y'all know these 543 valves and spark plugs. So I don't know that I want to take the risk on pulling the plug out. So we'll let the shop here make that decision, but I'm definitely going to grab a coil and stick a coil in this thing and see if we see this go away with this noise here going away, and see if this thing actually cranks and runs perfectly fine. So what do you think we found? Yep, a cheap coil that had been sitting in water, it looks like. It was definitely rusty in there. I've got a borescope that we're actually going to look down into the spark plug tube here and see the rust built up around the spark plug itself. So yeah, as you can see right here, there is so much rust around it, you can't even see the socket part of the spark plug. It was pretty bad. Me and the shop owner kind of looked, and we kind of think that water was basically rushing down the cowl and getting it in between the hood and the seal, and basically just kind of falling right down on top of the intake and everything. Because actually, beside the throttle body, there's also some water there as well. Well, we're driving it. Seems fine.
what we decided to do was we just took an air hose, blew out all that junk out of that number 4 hole, and basically put a new cool in it. We're going to try to put a plug in it, but it was generally like, okay, if we're going to put a plug in it, we need to get this thing hot first. Try to get the carbon softened up on the other side of the plug as much as we can. So we agreed, okay, let's throw a cool in, drive it, get it good and hot, and before we try to take this plug out. So far, we're fine. As you can see on the Picoscope, we've got a little bit of noise on some coal firing, but nothing like before, you know. Before we seen like 18 volts, 17, 18 volts in some of these spots. And right now, as you can see, we're fine. Like, we've got kind of just a normal amount of noise in our voltage traces. Some of these are a little high, and the ones that are actually high are number 1 for some reason. So I don't know if I'm getting some bleed through my cables or something, maybe some noise through my cables interfering with each other, or it may have multiple coils going bad. These are really cheap coils that are on this thing, so the shop's definitely going to recommend replacing all of the coils with some better quality ones, OEM if possible. But so far we're driving this sucker and it's fine. It's just crazy. Just crazy. So let me get to where I can kind of give it some throttle. See, we do have a couple of spikes there, but under load, this thing's pulling fine. Shifting through the gears fine. I got the snap-on running, and I had it laying down on the floor. So far, no codes set in it. No check engine light. I've got it up to temp already, so I've been driving it for a little bit. I'm gonna call it a fix. Kind of sucks that I put a PCM in this thing, but sometimes you just don't have a whole lot to go off of, and when it's a crazy situation like this, like it was just such an odd problem. So I know y'all are going to ask, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you. How much did you charge? How much time did you charge for? Well, the way I do my diagnostics is up front. If I give you an answer, that's how much you got charged. So I diagnosed this thing in my hour, you know, my normal upfront hour, as a bad PCM. That's what I'm charging, because I guarantee my diagnosis. So my initial charge is what they're getting billed. Granted, it's not what's wrong with it, and granted, most of the time I would tell people, you know, on this, you did it exactly right. Further testing is more billing, but it's also one of those things where I have a good rapport with the shops that I deal with, so sometimes I just eat stuff, and this is one of the ones I'm going to eat. probably about 8 to 10 hours worth of my time that I've spent on this thing, checking things and going over it. You know, it's just how it is. I'm just going to eat it and move on from there. Sometimes you just need to do that. It's part of it. And that's one of the reasons why they call me on some hard stuff, is because they know I guarantee my diagnosis. So my diagnosis was a bad PCM. I was wrong, even though the testing basically leads you to that. Anything after that, I'm just, it's just whatever. I'll lose 8 to 10 hours on this one. I make it up on pretty much every other ticket I do with them. So, as far as the PCM goes, I don't know what we're going to deal with that. Probably maybe see if the parts store will take it back, because it was a remand from a parts store. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe they'll take it back. If not, that'll probably still get billed to the customer, because, like I say, this is one of those real hard situations where, you take this to a shop, everybody that runs through these codes is going to put a PCM in this thing. Everybody. I don't care who you are. If you don't go through these codes and put a PCM in it, what are you putting in it? A throttle body? They did try a throttle body. So the shop, they're, on the hook for the throttle body, not me. That's them. They'll do whatever they want to with that end of it. But, like, anybody that runs through these codes correctly and approach them in the way that they present themselves is going to put a PCM in this. So probably that's getting billed to the customer. You can kind of think it's wrong. You can kind of agree, whatever, Sometimes wrong parts get put on cars for the right reason. This would have been the right reason. Everything says put PCM in this thing, so there you go. But anyways, as you can see, I'm still driving this thing. I've been talking to you guys, and I'm still driving it, and it's still running perfectly fine. So we're gonna get it back to the shop, and they'll take it from there as far as the plug goes, and probably putting the rest of the coils in this thing. Whatever the customer approves, because they're gonna have to make a discussion with the customer. They've already approved so much, but we'll get back to the shop and we'll discuss it over, see how they want to approach the whole PCM thing with the customer, and we'll go from there. But either way, this one was a loser, but kind of a win, because we fixed it. So that's it on this one, everybody. Hopefully you enjoyed it. It was a hard one. Definitely was a hard one. Seem to be getting a lot of those here lately. But that's just how it goes. So we'll see you guys later. And if you like it, hit the subscribe button, hit that like button.